coffee rings stained the mahogany desk. It was 2 in the morning, and Vincent Costa was missing a shipping container of imported firearms. His empire was built on violence, but it ran on spreadsheets managed by Clara. She was the ghost in his machine, always there, pressing files into his hands, never asking questions. Until tonight. Tonight, Clara's phone went straight to voicemail. When the head of the Costa family went hunting for his missing secretary, he didn't find her dead in a rival's warehouse. He found her wearing a stained apron, scrubbing floors at a 24-hour diner. Vincent Costa did not like mysteries. Mysteries in his line of work usually ended with federal indictments or someone bleeding out on a linoleum floor. He sat in the leather chair of his downtown high-rise, staring at the flashing cursor on his dual monitors. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the Chicago skyline into a smeared canvas of orange streetlights and black glass. The numbers on the screen weren't adding up. A shipment from Antwerp was stalled at the docks, and the customs manifest required a specific digital signature. Clara's signature. Vincent checked his Rolex. It was 2:14 a.m. He picked up his phone and dialed her number for the 4th time. It rang twice and clicked over to a generic, automated voicemail. He hung up. Clara Hayes had been his executive assistant for 3 years. She was a 26-year-old paradox. She wore tailored, muted skirts and sensible flats, kept her blonde hair pulled back in a severe clasp, and possessed the organizational skills of an air traffic controller. She didn't flinch when Vincent's associates walked into the office with bruised knuckles. She didn't ask why he needed offshore shell companies registered in Belize. She just did the work, brewed his espresso exactly the way he liked it, and vanished at exactly 6 p.m. every evening. Vincent paid her an exorbitant salary. 6 figures. Enough to keep her quiet, enough to keep her comfortable, and enough to ensure absolute loyalty. She had never missed a call. Not once. He pressed the intercom button. Poorly. The heavy oak door opened a crack, revealing the broad, broken-nosed face of his head of security. "Yeah, boss?" "Clara isn't answering her phone. She's not at her desk. Have you seen her?" "Left at 6, just like always," Paulie said, stepping into the room. "You want I should send someone to her apartment?" "I want her phone pinged," Vincent said, his voice dangerously flat. "Now, if the feds scooped her up, we have less than an hour to scrub the servers. If it's the Rossi family, we need to know where they took her." Paulie nodded, the casual demeanor instantly evaporating. He pulled a burner phone from his jacket and fired off a text to their tech guy. The silence in the office stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Vincent steepled his fingers, staring at the rain. He felt a strange, cold knot pulling tight in his chest. It wasn't just the manifest. He needed Clara. The entire machine required her quiet, frictionless presence to function. 10 minutes later, Paulie's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his thick brow furrowing. "Well?" Vincent snapped. "The feds didn't grab her," Paulie said, sounding confused. "And unless the Rossis opened a franchise of cheap diners, they didn't grab her neither." "Where is she?" "Phone is pinging at a place called Sonny's Plate, down in the south side. 43rd and Halstead. It's a greasy spoon. Open 24 hours. Vincent stared at him. "Is she moving?" "Stationary for the last 5 hours." Vincent stood up, grabbing his charcoal wool overcoat from the rack. "Bring the car around." "Boss, it's pouring. I can just go grab her." "I said bring the car around, Paulie." The drive down to the south side was a descent into a different world. The gleaming skyscrapers faded, replaced by crumbling brick facades, barred windows, and flickering street lamps. The Maybach slid quietly through the flooded potholes. They pulled up to a cinder block building radiating a sickly yellow fluorescent glow. A cracked neon sign buzzed in the window, sputtering the words, Sonny's. The parking lot held 3 rusted sedans and a semi-truck. Vincent stepped out of the car, pulling his collar up against the driving rain. He pushed through the heavy glass door. The air inside hit him like a physical blow. It smelled of stale fry grease, burnt filter coffee, and bleach. The linoleum floor was scarred and sticky. A few tired truck drivers hunched over the counter, cradling ceramic mugs. In the corner booth, a couple of teenagers were picking at a plate of cold fries. Vincent stood by the door, water dripping from his coat, his dark eyes scanning the room. He was looking for a hostage situation. He was looking for a dead drop. Instead, he heard a familiar, steady voice. "I can get you some more ranch for that, hun, but I have to charge you 50 cents. Boss's rules." Vincent turned his head. There she was, Clara. She wasn't wearing her beige silk blouse or her tailored pencil skirt. She was swimming in a hideous, faded pink polyester uniform. A stained white apron was tied tightly around her narrow waist. Her hair was messy, escaping its clip in damp strands around her face. She was holding a plastic tray loaded with dirty plates, balancing it on one hip as she wiped down a formica table with a grey rag. Pinned to her chest was a crooked plastic name tag that read, Cindy. Vincent froze. The cold knot in his chest dissolved, replaced by a sudden, jarring wave of pure disorientation. He watched the woman who managed millions of dollars of illicit syndicate funds bend down to scrape a piece of hardened chewing gum off the bottom of a chair. Vincent didn't move. He stood by the pie display case, a dark, expensive statue in a room built for cheap consumption. Paulie stepped in behind him, shaking off an umbrella, and stopped dead. Is that Clara?" Paulie whispered, his gravelly voice dropping an octave. "Wait in the car," Vincent ordered, not taking his eyes off her. "Boss, this area ain't—" "In the car, Paulie." The door chimed as Paulie stepped back, out into the rain. Vincent walked slowly to the only clean booth left in the diner, located in the far back corner. He slid into the cracked red vinyl seat. The table was still damp from a recent wipe-down. He watched her work. She was moving with a frantic, exhausted energy. Her shoulders slumped every time she thought no one was looking, only to aggressively straighten when a customer barked a demand. She didn't look like the untouchable, icy professional who guarded his office door. She looked small. She looked fragile. There were deep, purple shadows bruised beneath her eyes, visible even under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. A large man in a grease-stained mechanic's jacket slammed his empty mug on the counter. "Hey, Cindy, where's that refill?" Clara flinched. The tray in her hands rattled. "Coming, sir. Just a second." She practically ran behind the counter, grabbed a glass carafe of coffee, and hurried over to the man. She poured the coffee, her hand trembling slightly, spilling a few drops onto the counter. "Watch it, sweetheart," the mechanic grunted. "You're getting paid to pour, not to make a mess." Clara swallowed hard, her jaw tight. "I'm sorry. Let me clean that." Vincent felt a sudden, violent spike of anger. It was a hot, sharp sensation that tasted like copper in his mouth. He was used to anger. He used it as a tool. But this was different. This wasn't professional. This was entirely visceral. He wanted to walk over to the counter, grab the mechanic by the back of his greasy neck, and introduce his face to the heavy ceramic mug. He forced himself to stay seated. He needed to understand what he was looking at before he burned the place to the ground. He paid Clara $140,000 a year. She received Christmas bonuses that could buy a luxury sedan. Why in the hell was she scrubbing tables for tips at 3 a.m? Clara turned away from the counter, scanning the room for new tables. Her eyes landed on the back booth. She stopped walking, the coffee carafe in her hand tilted dangerously. She stared at Vincent, sitting there in his custom-tailored suit, his dark eyes locked onto hers. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly. For a second, Vincent thought she might actually faint. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just tapped the formica table with his index finger. Clara swallowed, her throat bobbing. She put the carafe down on a nearby counter, took a shaky breath, and walked slowly toward his booth. She stopped 2 feet away, her hands twisting nervously in the fabric of her stained apron. "Mr. Costa," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, completely lacking its usual crisp authority. "Hello, Clara," Vincent said softly. He gestured to the name tag. "Or is it Cindy tonight?" She looked down at the plastic tag and quickly unpinned it, shoving it into her apron pocket. Her cheeks burned with a sudden, humiliating flush of red. What are you doing here?" "I needed the digital signature for the Antwerp manifest," Vincent said, leaning back against the vinyl. "You didn't answer your phone. I thought you were dead." Clara closed her eyes for a brief second. "My phone. It's in my locker. I'm not allowed to have it on the floor. Mr. Costa, I am so sorry. I can run to the back and log into the portal right now." "Sit down," Vincent interrupted. Clara's eyes darted around the diner. "I can't. My shift manager is in the back. If he catches me sitting with a customer, he'll dock my pay." Vincent leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. The dangerous, quiet authority that kept hardened killers in line radiated from him in waves. "Clara, sit. Down." She slid into the booth opposite him, keeping her back straight, perching on the edge of the seat as if preparing to bolt. She refused to meet his eyes, staring instead at his expensive leather shoes. "Explain this to me," Vincent said, keeping his voice low. "You leave my office at 6. You come here." "My shift starts at 8, she mumbled. "And ends when?" 4 in the morning. 4? Vincent calculated the hours. "You go home, sleep for 2 hours, and get to my office by 8. How long have you been doing this?" She finally looked up, her eyes defensive and terrified. 6 months. Vincent felt a cold shock register in his chest. 6 months. She had been running his entire life, managing his schedules, booking his flights, handling the most sensitive documents in his organization, all while surviving on a 2-hour sleep cycle and scrubbing floors. "Why?" he asked. The single word felt heavy. Before Clara could answer, a loud, abrasive voice cut across the diner. "Cindy, what the hell do you think you're doing?" A short, balding man in a tight polo shirt marched out from the kitchen, a clipboard in his hand. His face was red with cheap outrage. He stormed over to their booth, glaring at Clara. "Are you on break? Because the schedule says you don't get a break until 3:30. Get up. Table 4 needs bussing, and the men's room ran out of paper towels." Clara immediately started to scramble out of the booth. "I'm sorry, Gary. I was just—" Vincent reached out and grabbed Clara's wrist. His grip was firm, unyielding. He didn't look at her. He looked up at the manager. "She's busy," Vincent said. The tone was polite, but the pitch was dead flat. It was the tone of a predator warning off a scavenger. Gary sneered. "I don't care if she's busy chatting up a customer. I pay her to work. Cindy, get your ass up right now, or you're fired." Vincent slowly let go of Clara's wrist. He reached inside his breast pocket, pulled out a sleek leather money clip, and peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills. He placed them on the table, sliding them toward the edge. "Clara," Vincent said, never breaking eye contact with the manager. "Take off the apron." "Mr. Costa, please," Clara pleaded quietly. "I need this job." Vincent ignored her. He looked at Gary. The 500 is for her shift tonight. You're going to take this money. You're going to go back into your kitchen, and you're going to forget this woman ever existed. Because if you speak to her in that tone of voice again, I will buy this building tomorrow morning, fire you, and personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life unemployable. Do you understand me? Gary looked from the money to Vincent's cold, dead eyes. The bravado melted off the manager's face in an instant, replaced by the primal recognition of extreme danger. He snatched the bills off the table and backed away without a word. Vincent looked back at Clara. The apron. Take it off, we're leaving. The interior of the Maybach was silent, save for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers pushing the heavy rain away. The leather seats were heated, a stark contrast to the damp chill of the diner. Clara sat huddled against the passenger door. She had taken off the apron, leaving her in a plain, faded black t-shirt and jeans. She looked small, staring out the window at the blurred city lights. She hadn't said a word since Vincent escorted her out of the diner. Vincent sat beside her, a glass partition separating them from Paulie and the driver's seat. He poured a neat measure of scotch from the small crystal decanter hidden in the console and held it out to her. She shook her head. I don't drink, Mr. Costa. Drink it, he said gently, placing the heavy glass in her hand. You're shaking. She looked down at her hands. He was right. A fine tremor ran through her fingers. She brought the glass to her lips and took a small sip, wincing as the alcohol burned its way down her throat. My laptop is in the trunk, Vincent said, breaking the silence. I routed the Antwerp signature through the secondary server on the way to the car. It's handled. Don't worry about it. Clara slumped slightly, releasing a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. Thank you. And I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been unreachable. Stop apologizing. Vincent turned in his seat to face her. The ambient light from the street lamps illuminated the sharp, patrician angles of his face. I pay you enough to live in a penthouse overlooking the lake, Clara. I pay you enough to eat at 5-star restaurants every night. Why are you working a graveyard shift for minimum wage? Clara stared into the amber liquid in her glass. The silence stretched. The defensive walls she maintained at the office were crumbling under the sheer weight of her exhaustion. You wouldn't understand, she whispered. Try me. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. I have expenses. What kind of expenses? Vincent pressed. Medical bills? A sick relative? If you needed a loan, Clara, you should have come to me. I would have fronted you the cash. You know that. I can't borrow money from you, she said quickly, finally looking up. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't owe you anything. Not you. Vincent narrowed his eyes. The phrasing caught his attention. Not you. Who do you owe, Clara? She bit her bottom lip, turning her head back toward the window. It's not my debt. It's my father's. He passed away 8 months ago. Before he died, he had a problem. Gambling. Horses mostly. But then cards. He thought he could win back the house. Vincent felt a familiar, cynical weariness settle into his bones. He knew this story. He had seen it play out 1,000 times in 100 different back rooms. It was the pathetic, ordinary tragedy of desperate men. He took a loan from the wrong kind of people, Vincent stated. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded slowly. He owed $80,000. When he died, they came to the funeral. They told me the debt transferred. And the interest. They charged me $2,000 a week just to keep the principal from growing. My salary from you pays the interest and my rent. The diner pays for my groceries and electricity. Vincent felt a muscle tick in his jaw. 2 points a week. That was street loan sharking at its most predatory. He did the math. She was drowning. No matter how many hours she worked, she would never touch the principal. They were bleeding her out slowly. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Vincent asked. Clara looked at him, a sudden flash of real anger in her eyes. "You think I'm stupid? I work for you, Mr. Costa. I know how this city works. If I went to the cops, they'd laugh at me, or worse, they'd tell the guys I owe. And then those guys would put a bullet in my sister's head to make a point. I'm paying it. I'm handling it." She wasn't handling it. She was breaking. But her defiance struck a chord in him. She was fiercely protective, absorbing the punishment meant for her family without a single complaint. "Who holds the paper?" Vincent asked quietly. "What?" "The debt. Who did your father borrow the money from?" Clara gripped her glass tighter. "His name is Mickey. Mickey Dolan. They call him the Hammer." Vincent went entirely still. The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't just know Mickey Dolan. Mickey Dolan ran the sports books and the loan sharking operations out of the North Side docks. Mickey Dolan was a capo. Mickey Dolan answered to a man named Sal, and Sal answered to Vincent. The realization hit Vincent with the force of a physical blow. The irony was suffocating. Clara was working herself into an early grave, destroying her health and her sanity, to hand her salary right back into the very organization that paid her. His organization. He was the one breaking her. The money he paid her for her impeccable loyalty was being extorted out of her by his own bottom feeders. He looked at Clara. She was staring at him, unaware of the revelation that had just rewritten the entire dynamic of their relationship. She just looked tired. So impossibly tired. "Mr. Costa?" she asked nervously, noting the terrifying stillness that had overtaken him. "Are you angry?" "Yes," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous whisper. "I am very angry." "I promise it won't affect my work," she rushed out, misinterpreting his fury. "I'll quit the diner. I'll find another way to make the extra money. I just need—" Vincent reached across the console. He didn't grab her wrist this time. He gently wrapped his large, warm hand over hers, still trembling around the Scotch glass. The contact stopped her frantic apologies mid-sentence. "You aren't quitting the diner, Clara," Vincent said, his eyes burning with a dark, resolved fire. "Because you already walked out. You aren't finding another job. And you are never handing another dime to Mickey Dolan as long as you live." Clara shook her head, panic rising in her chest. "You don't understand. He'll kill me. He said—" "Mickey Dolan," Vincent interrupted, his voice dropping a register, vibrating with absolute authority. "Works for me." Clara froze. The breath hitched in her throat. She stared at him, her brain struggling to process the words. She knew Vincent was powerful. She knew he was dangerous. She handled the spreadsheets, but the reality of his reach had always been abstract numbers on a screen. Now the monster was in the room, and it was looking right at her. "I pay him," Vincent continued, his thumb gently brushing across her bruised knuckles. "He kicks up his profits to my lieutenants. Your father's debt. It belongs to my family." Clara swallowed hard, tears finally spilling over her lower lashes. "Then, what are you going to do?" Vincent let go of her hand and leaned forward, tapping his knuckles against the glass partition. "Poorly," Vincent barked. The glass slid down instantly. "Yeah, boss. Cancel my morning meetings. Call Sal. Tell him to wake up Mickey Dolan and bring him to the meat-packing plant." Paulie glanced in the rear-view mirror, catching the lethal glint in Vincent's eye. "Got it. Anything else?" Vincent looked back at Clara, noting the way she was sinking into the leather seat, the adrenaline finally leaving her system, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion. "Yes," Vincent said softly. "Drive to my place. Clara needs to sleep." The elevator ride to the top floor of the Gold Coast high-rise took exactly 42 seconds. Clara counted them. It was a habit born of anxiety, a way to anchor her mind when everything else was drifting away. Vincent's penthouse was vast and oppressively quiet. It smelled of cedarwood and cold glass. There was no clutter, no personal photographs, no soft edges. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, a black void churning under the storm. Clara stood awkwardly on the dark, hardwood floor, her cheap, wet sneakers squeaking slightly. She wrapped her arms around her torso. The adrenaline crash was hitting her in waves, making her skin cold and her joints ache. She felt entirely alien in this space. She was a spreadsheet anomaly, a smudge of dirt on a sterile countertop. Vincent stripped off his wet overcoat and tossed it over a leather chair. He walked into the kitchen, a sprawling expanse of black marble, and poured a glass of water. He brought it to her. "Drink," he said. She took it with both hands, drinking it too fast. The water was icy, grounding her. "Down the hall, second door on the left," Vincent pointed. "There's an ensuite bathroom. Towels are in the cabinet. Leave your wet clothes in the hamper." Clara hesitated. Her brain, usually capable of processing complex offshore tax evasion schemes in seconds, felt packed with wet cotton. "Mr. Costa, I really should just go to my apartment. It's late. You have—" She waved a hand vaguely. "You have things to do. Your apartment is a fifth-floor walk-up in Rogers Park," Vincent replied, his tone brooking no argument. "It's an hour away in this rain. You are dead on your feet. You are staying here." He walked down the hallway, leaving her standing there. A moment later, he returned holding a thick, grey cotton t-shirt and a pair of dark flannel sweatpants. He held them out to her. "They'll be large," he said, his eyes scanning her pale face. "But they are clean and dry." Clara took the clothes. The fabric was heavy, soft, and smelled faintly of the same cedarwood that permeated the apartment. She looked down at them, then back up at the man who commanded an army of violent men, a man who was currently dictating her bedtime routine. "Thank you," she whispered. "Go to sleep, Clara." She nodded and retreated down the hallway. The guest room was larger than her entire apartment. A massive, king-sized bed dominated the space, layered in crisp white linens and a heavy down comforter. She moved mechanically. She stripped off the damp jeans and the faded black shirt, stepping into the scalding hot shower in the attached bathroom. She stood under the spray until her skin turned pink, letting the heat leach the deep, rattling chill from her bones. When she finally emerged, drowning in Vincent's oversized clothes, she crawled into the bed. The sheets felt like liquid silk. She expected her mind to race. She expected to lie awake, terrified of what Vincent was going to do to the men who held her father's debt. Instead, the moment her head hit the heavy pillows, her body simply shut down. For the first time in 6 months, Clara Hayes closed her eyes without setting an alarm. In the living room, Vincent stood by the window, watching the rain batter the glass. He poured himself another scotch. He didn't drink it. He just held the heavy crystal, letting the chill of the ice seep into his palm. His empire was a machine of leverage and fear. He knew exactly what he was. He didn't harbor illusions of nobility. He moved money, he moved weapons, and he moved people who got in his way. But he operated by a strict code. You didn't bleed the innocent. You didn't choke out the people who kept the lights on. And Clara was the brightest light in his organization. She was fiercely intelligent, endlessly competent, and completely isolated. He had built a fortress around himself, and she was the only one allowed inside the gate. The realization that his own bottom feeders had been slowly crushing her to death under his nose filled him with a cold, absolute rage. He pulled out his phone. "Poorly," Vincent said when the line clicked open. "Are they there?" "Yeah, boss. Sal dragged him out of bed. He's still in his pajamas, sweating like a pig. I'm on my way." The facility in the West Loop officially processed wholesale beef for the city's high-end restaurants. Unofficially, it was soundproof, easy to hose down, and owned entirely by a shell company registered to Vincent Costa. The air inside the massive warehouse was freezing. The sharp stench of ammonia and raw meat hung thick in the atmosphere. Rows of suspended steel hooks clattered softly overhead as the massive ventilation fans kicked on. Vincent walked through the heavy plastic strip curtains. His footsteps echoed off the concrete. In the center of the loading bay, under a single harsh floodlight, sat Mickey Dolan. He was a thick, balding man in his late 50s, currently wearing a stained undershirt, pajama bottoms, and a very expensive pair of loafers. His hands were zip-tied to the arms of an aluminum folding chair. Standing a few feet away was Sal, a sharply dressed lieutenant who managed the North Side rackets. Sal looked nervous. "You didn't get called to the meat cooler at 4 in the morning for a promotion." Paulie stood by the door, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick. Mickey looked up as Vincent approached. The loan shark's face was pale, his eyes darting frantically. "Mr. Costa, boss, I swear to God I don't know what this is about. Sal just pulled me out of my house. The envelopes are on time. The book is balanced, I swear." Vincent didn't look at Mickey. He walked over to a metal prep table and picked up a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Sal had brought it from Mickey's home office. Vincent flipped the book open. The pages were filled with columns of names, dates, and numbers. He turned the pages slowly, the only sound in the cavernous room, the soft rustle of heavy paper. "Page 42, Vincent said, his voice quiet. He found the page. He ran his index finger down the column. "Thomas Hayes." Mickey swallowed audibly. "Tommy Hayes. Yeah, the degenerate. He took 80 large for a string of bad ponies. He died a while back. But the paper is still good, boss. His kid is paying it down. Never missed a week. It's good business." "His kid," Vincent repeated flatly. "Yeah, some uptight broad. Works in an office or something. I put the squeeze on her. Told her I'd break her sister's legs if she didn't cover the vig. She pays $2,000 a week like clockwork. Cash." Mickey puffed his chest out slightly, mistaking Vincent's quiet demeanor for approval. "It's a beautiful stream of revenue." Sal shifted uncomfortably on his feet. He could read the room better than Mickey. He could see the absolute zero in Vincent's eyes. Vincent closed the ledger. The heavy thud echoed off the concrete walls. $2,000 a week, Vincent said, walking slowly toward the chair. For a principal of 80,000, an interest rate designed to ensure the debt is never actually paid, designed to bleed the debtor until they break. "That's the business, boss," Mickey said, his nervous smile faltering. "You know how it works." "I know exactly how it works, Mickey." Vincent stopped 2 feet in front of the chair. He looked down at the man. "What you don't know is who you are bleeding." I don't follow." "The uptight broad, who pays you $2,000 a week," Vincent said, every word dripping with frozen venom, "is Clara Hayes. She manages my schedules. She manages my offshore accounts. She manages the flow of every single dollar that enters and exits this family." Mickey's jaw dropped. The color rushed completely out of his face, leaving him a sickening, pasty gray. "Mr. Costa, I didn't know. I swear to Christ, I had no idea who she worked for. Tommy never said—" "Shut up," Vincent commanded. The whisper cut through the room like a scalpel. Mickey snapped his mouth shut, a small whimper escaping his throat. Vincent leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of Mickey's chair, trapping the man in his space. Clara is the engine of my organization. She is flawless. And for the last 6 months, you have forced her to work a graveyard shift at a diner, scrubbing grease off floors to pay a debt that isn't hers. You exhausted my primary asset. You threatened her sister. You touched something that belongs to me. I'll cancel it, Mickey cried out, tears of genuine terror springing to his eyes. The debt is gone, boss. Forgiven. Right now. Just... Please, I didn't know. No, you didn't, Vincent agreed, straightening up. If you had known, and you still did it, I would have Paulie put you on a hook in the freezer right now. Mickey sobbed, a pathetic, wet sound. Vincent turned to Sal. This operation is over. Mickey's book belongs to you now. Liquidate his assets. Move his clients to the standard house rate. If I ever hear of a 2-point weekly vig being charged to a civilian under my banner again, I will hold you personally responsible. Sal nodded sharply. Understood, boss. What about Mickey? Vincent looked at the loan shark. Mickey is retiring, to Florida. Today. Vincent reached down, grabbed Mickey's right hand, the hand strapped to the chair, and efficiently, brutally, slammed the heavy, leather-bound ledger down across his fingers. The sickening crack of bone was entirely drowned out by Mickey's agonizing scream. Vincent dropped the ledger on the floor. He didn't blink. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands. You leave Chicago by noon, Mickey. If I see you in my city again, I'll take the other hand. Then your feet. Vincent looked at Sal. Clean this up. Vincent turned and walked out of the warehouse. The storm had broken, leaving the early morning sky a bruised, muted purple. He got into the back of the Maybach. He felt the heavy, dark coil of anger loosen just a fraction in his chest. But it wasn't gone. Home, boss? Paulie asked, putting the car in gear. Home, Vincent said. He looked down at his hands. They were steady, but his mind was already back at the penthouse, calculating the exact moment Clara would wake up. Clara woke to the smell of roasted coffee and silence. She opened her eyes, panic immediately seizing her throat. She sat bolt upright, searching blindly for her phone, her brain screaming that she was late for her shift, late for the office, late for a payment. Her hands hit the heavy, luxurious duvet. The panic stuttered, then slowly receded, replaced by a profound, disorienting confusion. She looked around the massive, sunlit bedroom. The memories of the diner, the rain, the agonizing ride in the Maybach, and the terrifying revelation of Vincent's connection to her debt came flooding back. She looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. It read 11:14 a.m. She had slept for nearly 8 hours. Clara threw off the covers. She was still wearing Vincent's oversized clothes. She rolled up the legs of the flannel pants and padded barefoot out of the bedroom. The penthouse was flooded with pale morning light. She walked down the hallway, following the scent of the coffee. Vincent was in the kitchen. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, wearing only his crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing the dark ink of old tattoos she had never seen before. He was standing by a gleaming espresso machine, watching the dark liquid pour into a small ceramic cup. He didn't look like a Mafia boss right now. He looked like a man making a cup of coffee. But Clara knew better. She knew the ledgers. She knew what he was capable of. Good morning, Vincent said, not turning around. Clara stopped in the doorway. How did you know I was there? You squeak on the hardwood, he replied, turning off the machine. He picked up 2 cups and carried them over to the massive kitchen island. He set one down across from him and pushed one of the modern bar stools out with his foot. "Sit," Clara sat. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic cup, kneading the anchor. She looked at him. He looked just as exhausted as she felt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. "I missed work," she stated, her voice raspy from sleep. "The board meeting at 10. "I cancelled it," Vincent interrupted. He took a sip of his espresso. "Your phone has been ringing." "I turned it off." Clara swallowed hard. The reality of her situation was pressing down on her. She was sitting in the private sanctuary of a dangerous man who now knew exactly how thoroughly she had been compromised. "Mr. Costa," she began, keeping her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "About last night, I don't know what you expect from me now. I know my value to you is my efficiency, my lack of baggage. If you need me to resign, I will. I can train a replacement. But please, I just need you to know that I never let it compromise your accounts." Vincent set his cup down. He stared at her, an unreadable expression on his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single torn piece of paper. He slid it across the marble counter. Clara looked at it. It was a page torn from a ledger. Her father's name, Thomas Hayes, was written at the top. Beneath it was a long, depressing column of dates and $2,000 payments. Drawn across the entire page, in thick, black, permanent marker, was a single word. Cleared. Clara's breath hitched. She stared at the paper. Her vision blurred, tears welling up instantly, hot and fast. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the ink, as if afraid it was an illusion. "Mickey Dolan has relocated," Vincent said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "His book has been seized. Your father's debt is void. You don't owe Mickey. You don't owe Sal. It's gone." Clara looked up at him, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot line down her cheek. She was cynical. She grew up in a world where nothing was free. Everything had a price, and men like Vincent Costa didn't do favors out of the kindness of their hearts. "What do I owe you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I can't pay $80,000, Mr. Costa. I can't. If you bought the debt, I don't." "Stop!" Vincent's voice cracked like a whip in the quiet kitchen. He closed his eyes for a second, pinching the bridge of his nose. When he opened them, the coldness was gone, replaced by an intensity that made Clara want to shrink back. "You don't owe me money," Vincent said slowly, deliberately. "The debt is dead. Erased. Do you understand? I didn't buy it. I burned it." Clara shook her head, unable to process the finality of it. "Why? Why would you do that?" Vincent leaned across the counter. He reached out and, with absolute gentleness, used his thumb to wipe the tear off her cheek. His skin was rough, contrasting with the soft, deliberate motion. "Because my empire runs on a machine," Vincent said softly, "and you are the only part of it I care about. You belong in my office. You belong making my life function. You do not belong scrubbing floors for scavengers." Clara sat entirely frozen. The touch burned. His words burned. He wasn't speaking to her as an employee. He was speaking to her with a ferocious, territorial protection that she had never experienced in her entire life. She was used to being the shield for her family, absorbing the blows. She didn't know how to exist behind someone else's wall. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't thank me," Vincent replied, pulling his hand back. The professional distance returned, but it was fragile now, heavily altered by what had passed between them. "What you do is go back into that bedroom, put your wet clothes in the dryer, and get dressed. Then you are going to eat a meal that doesn't come out of a fryer. And tonight, you are going to sleep for another 8 hours. Clara managed a weak, watery laugh. And tomorrow, Vincent picked up his espresso cup. The ghost of a smirk finally touched the corners of his mouth. "Tomorrow," he said, "I expect you at your desk at 8 a.m. sharp, and you better have my coffee ready. The way I like it." Monday morning arrived with the brutal clarity of a hangover. Clara stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor at exactly 7:45 a.m. She wore a charcoal grey pencil skirt and a crisp white blouse. Her hair was pulled back into its severe, familiar clasp. To anyone else, she was exactly the same. But the air in the office had changed. Paulie was standing by the reception desk. Normally, he would give her a grunt of acknowledgement and go back to reading the sports section. Today, he straightened up. He gave her a sharp, respectful nod. "Morning, Clara," Paulie said. His gravelly voice held a new cadence. It wasn't just respect for the boss's secretary. It was the respect reserved for a made member of the inner circle. "Good morning, Paulie," she replied, her voice steady. She walked to the kitchenette, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. She prepared Vincent's espresso. Dark roast, tightly packed, short pull. No sugar. She placed the ceramic cup on a silver tray with a glass of sparkling water and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the inner office. She paused with her hand on the brass handle. Her heart executed a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. The weekend had been a blur of exhausted sleep and quiet panic. The reality of what Vincent had done, crippling a capo to erase her debt, was a massive, unpayable ledger hanging over her head. She pushed the door open. Vincent was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, talking on his cell phone in rapid, clipped Italian. He wore a navy suit that fit him like armor. He heard the door close and turned around. He held up a finger to the person on the phone, barked a final command, and ended the call. He tossed the phone onto the mahogany desk. 8 a.m. sharp, Vincent noted, his dark eyes tracking her movements as she set the tray on his desk. "I prefer to be punctual," Clara said. She took a step back, folding her hands in front of her skirt. The Antwerp container was cleared by customs at 4 this morning. The shell company in Belize transferred the funds to the Rossi family's intermediary account. You have a meeting with the union reps at 11 and a lunch with the alderman at 1. Vincent didn't look at the files she had placed next to his coffee. He looked at her. He studied the lack of dark circles under her eyes. He noted the color that had returned to her cheeks. "Did you sleep?" he asked. The question was a blatant violation of their old protocol. They didn't discuss personal matters. They discussed money, logistics, and leverage. "I did. Thank you." Clara swallowed, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "Mr. Costa, I want to reiterate that my personal life will not—" "Clara," Vincent interrupted, picking up the espresso. He took a sip, closing his eyes briefly as the bitter liquid hit his tongue. "The coffee is perfect. Your work is perfect. Stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. There is no other shoe. People don't just erase $80,000. I am not people." Vincent set the cup down. He leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms. The proximity was deliberate. He was invading her meticulously constructed professional space. "I protect my investments. You are my most valuable investment. Do you understand? I'm an employee." "You're the ghost in the machine," Vincent corrected, his voice dropping to a low, rough hum. "Sal came to me yesterday. He asked if you needed a detail, a couple of guys to watch your apartment, make sure Mickey didn't leave any loose ends." Clara stiffened. "I don't need bodyguards." "I told him no," Vincent said, "because I don't want my men watching you. But I am moving you out of Rogers Park. What? No, you can't just— I own a building in the Gold Coast, Vincent continued smoothly, ignoring her protest. Doorman, secure underground parking. The penthouse below mine is empty. You're moving in on Friday. Clara stared at him. The cynicism she had worn like a second skin for 26 years flared up. She knew how powerful men operated. They didn't do things for free. They bought you. And once they bought you, they owned you. "Is this a cage, Mr. Costa?" she asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Because if I'm trading Mickey Dolan for you, I'd rather know the terms of my servitude up front." Vincent flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a slight tightening of his jaw. But Clara saw it. He stepped forward, invading her space completely. She didn't back away. She tilted her chin up to look him in the eye. He reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before resting his knuckles gently against her cheekbone. The touch was entirely at odds with the violent world he inhabited. "I don't build cages for the people I care about," Vincent said, his voice stripped of its usual commanding edge, leaving something raw and dangerous underneath. "I build fortresses. You pay rent. You keep your salary. But you live where I know you are safe. That is the only term." He pulled his hand back, leaving a trail of heat on her skin. He turned and walked around the desk, sitting down in his leather chair. The moment was over. The boss was back. "Send Paulie in," Vincent said, opening a file. "We need to discuss the union reps." Clara nodded slowly. She walked out of the office, her legs feeling slightly numb. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that she was no longer just his secretary. She was his weakness. And in their world, weaknesses were always exploited. 3 weeks passed. The transition into the new apartment was seamless, orchestrated entirely by Vincent's people. Clara's life settled into a new, strange rhythm. She wasn't exhausted anymore. She had money in her savings account. She had her weekends to herself. But the peace was an illusion. In the syndicate, every action triggered an equal and opposite reaction. Mickey Dolan had been exiled, but he hadn't operated in a vacuum. He had a nephew. Arthur Dolan was a volatile, mid-level enforcer who ran a string of illegal gambling dens in the south suburbs. He was bitter, he was stupid, and he was highly motivated to prove he wasn't a coward like his uncle. It happened on a Thursday evening. Vincent was locked in a tense sit-down with the Rossi family across town. Clara was alone in the executive suite, finishing up the weekly cash flow reports. The heavy oak doors burst open. Clara didn't jump. She calmly saved the spreadsheet she was working on, locked her screen, and looked up. Arthur Dolan stood in the doorway. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed with cheap cocaine and adrenaline. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand, down by his side, but the intent was clear. 2 of his men flanked him, looking nervously down the hallway. Paulie and the night security team were nowhere in sight. "Where is he?" Arthur demanded, stepping into the office. "Mr. Costa is out for the evening," Clara said. Her voice was ice. She kept her hands above the desk, resting on the polished mahogany. She calculated the distance to the panic button under the lip of the desk. 4 inches. "Don't lie to me, you tight-ass bitch," Arthur spat, closing the distance. "I know he's here. I know you're his little pet. You're the reason my uncle is eating canned soup in a trailer park in Boca." Clara didn't move her hand. Not yet. Arthur was jittery. A sudden movement would get her shot. She needed to de-escalate, or better yet, she needed to break him. She was the ghost in the machine. She knew where all the bodies were buried, including Arthur's. "Your uncle is in Florida because he stole from Vincent Costa," Clara said evenly. "He skimmed the interest on unsanctioned street loans." "He was making a living," Arthur shouted, raising the gun slightly. And Costa broke his hand over a secretary? No, bullshit. You're fucking him. That's the only way he throws a loyal earner to the wolves. Clara felt a cold, detached calm wash over her. It was the same calm she felt when auditing a hostile takeover. Arthur was a loud, messy problem, and Clara specialized in cleaning up messes. "Arthur," Clara said, leaning forward slightly, "do you know what my job actually is?" Arthur blinked, thrown off by the shift in her tone. "What?" "I don't just fetch coffee," Clara said, her eyes locking onto his. "I control the digital infrastructure of this family. I know about the auto body shop on 5th Street that you use to launder the money from your dice games, the one registered to your mother's maiden name." Arthur went perfectly still. The gun wavered. "Shut up! I know that last month you shorted your kick-up to Sal by $12,000, Clara continued, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You coded it as equipment maintenance on the ledger. But I audit the ledgers, Arthur. I flagged it. I just haven't shown it to Mr. Costa yet." Sweat beaded on Arthur's forehead. His men shifted uncomfortably by the door. "You're bluffing," Arthur sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. Clara slowly, deliberately, moved her right hand to her mouse. She unlocked her screen. She clicked 3 times. "The offshore account holding the operating funds for your gambling dens," Clara said. "Account ending in 4409. I just froze it." "You can't do that." "I just did," Clara said. "Your payroll bounces tomorrow. The men who run security for your games won't get paid. How long do you think they'll stay loyal when the checks stop cashing?" Arthur stared at her, real terror finally piercing through the narcotic haze. He had come here expecting a cowering secretary he could use as leverage. Instead, he was standing in front of an apex predator with a keyboard. "Unfreeze it," Arthur demanded, pointing the gun directly at her chest. "No." The word hung in the air, absolute and final. Before Arthur could react, the glass wall behind him shattered. The heavy soundproof door to the outer hallway was kicked off its hinges. Paulie came through low and fast, a shotgun braced against his shoulder. He fired once. The beanbag round caught one of Arthur's men in the chest, folding him backward. Arthur spun around in panic. A shadow moved from the shattered glass of the private elevator. Vincent Costa stepped into the room. He didn't have a weapon drawn. He didn't need one. The sheer, radiating violence of his presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. Arthur dropped the gun. It clattered uselessly on the hardwood floor. He raised his hands, shaking violently. "Boss! Vincent, I swear, I just wanted to talk." Vincent didn't look at Arthur. He walked straight past the trembling man. He kept his eyes locked entirely on Clara. He moved behind her desk, his large hands gripping her shoulders. His grip was tight, bordering on painful, checking her for injuries through touch. "Are you hurt?" Vincent asked. His voice was a terrifying, hollow rasp. "I'm fine," Clara said, leaning back slightly into his touch. The adrenaline was finally beginning to crash, making her hands shake. Vincent looked at the computer screen. He saw the frozen accounts. He saw the flagged audit of Arthur's skimming. He looked down at Clara, a dark, dangerous pride swelling in his chest. She hadn't hit the panic button. She had dismantled the man systematically. Vincent finally turned to look at Arthur. The enforcer was on his knees, Paulie's boot pressed firmly against the back of his neck. "Arthur," Vincent said, his voice returning to that dead, flat pitch that promised absolute ruin. "You broke into my office. You threatened the woman who runs my life. And worst of all, you stole from me." "Boss, please." "Take him to the meatpacking plant," Vincent told Paulie. "Call Sal. Tell him to meet us there." Paulie hauled Arthur to his feet, dragging the sobbing man out of the office. The remaining muscle scrambled out behind them, eager to escape the graveyard. Silence descended on the ruined office. The wind howled through the shattered glass of the private elevator shaft. Clara sat in her chair, staring at the discarded gun on the floor. Her breathing was ragged. Vincent knelt beside her chair. He didn't care about his expensive suit. He took her shaking hands in his, rubbing his thumbs over her knuckles. "I told you I build fortresses," Vincent said quietly. "I should have made the walls higher." Clara looked at him. The mask of the untouchable Mafia boss was gone. The man looking back at her was entirely stripped bare, entirely vulnerable to the fact that he had almost lost the only thing that mattered to him. "I didn't need the walls to be higher," Clara whispered. "I handled it." "I know you did." Vincent smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. "You froze his accounts. You bankrupted a crew boss in 4 minutes. He was messy," Clara stated, a small, cynical smirk touching her lips. "I hate messy." The cleanup took hours. The glass was swept away, the doors were replaced by the night crew, and Arthur Dolan became a ghost story whispered among the lower ranks of the syndicate. It was 3 a.m. The office was quiet. The rain had started again, drumming a steady rhythm against the replaced windows. Vincent sat on the leather sofa in the corner of his office. He had poured 2 glasses of scotch. Clara sat next to him. She wasn't perched on the edge of the seat defensively anymore. She was leaning back, her shoulder pressing lightly against his. The barrier between employer and employee had been utterly obliterated in the span of 3 weeks. She took a sip of the scotch. It burned, but it settled her nerves. "You're going to have to find a new crew boss for the south suburbs," Clara noted, looking at the amber liquid in her glass. "Sal can handle it for now," Vincent replied, staring out at the city lights. The silence stretched. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a standoff. It was the comfortable, loaded silence of 2 people who understood the mechanics of survival. They were both cynics. They both knew the world was a brutal, transactional place. But what they had carved out together was an anomaly. It was off the books. "Why did you really come to the diner that night, Vincent?" It was the first time she had used his first name. It felt strange on her tongue, heavy and intimate. Vincent slowly turned his head to look at her. The shadows of the room caught the sharp angles of his face. "I told you. I needed the Antwerp signature." "You could have bypassed my authorization," Clara challenged softly. "You have the master codes. I built the system. I know exactly what you can do." Vincent looked down at his glass. A dry chuckle rumbled in his chest. "You caught me. So why?" Vincent set his glass down on the mahogany coffee table. He turned fully toward her, resting his arm along the back of the sofa, right behind her neck. He didn't touch her, but the heat radiating from him was a physical presence. "Because the machine stopped working," Vincent admitted, his voice rough. "For 3 years I walked into this office and you were here. You handled the chaos. You insulated me. You were the only thing in my life that didn't require violence or leverage to maintain. You were just constant. And when you didn't answer the phone, the silence was deafening." Clara swallowed hard. She looked into his dark eyes, seeing the ruthless boss and the exhausted man perfectly overlaid. "I thought I was just doing my job," she whispered. "You were keeping me human, Clara," Vincent said. He reached out, his fingers finally brushing the hair back from her temple. "I didn't realize how much of my sanity relied on you until I saw you wearing that name tag, scrubbing floors for a parasite." Clara leaned into his touch. She had spent her entire life carrying the weight of her family's debts, protecting her sister, surviving the grind. She had never allowed herself the luxury of leaning on someone else, because the people in her world always broke. But Vincent Costa wouldn't break. I don't know how to do this, Clara confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I know spreadsheets. I know risk assessment. I don't know how to navigate this. Us. In this world, attachments are liabilities. They are, Vincent agreed immediately, without romanticizing the truth. The moment the other families realize what you are to me, you become a target. You saw it tonight with Arthur. So what do we do? Vincent slid his hand from her hair down to the back of her neck, pulling her gently forward until their foreheads rested against each other. They shared the same breath, the scent of cedarwood, scotch, and rain wrapping around them. We rewrite the ledger, Vincent whispered fiercely. We let them know that the cost of looking at you is total annihilation. I don't hide my liabilities, Clara. I weaponize them. Clara let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It was the most brutally romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. There were no promises of walking away into the sunset. There were no illusions of a clean, normal life. There was only the syndicate, the violence, and the absolute certainty that he would burn the city to ashes before he let anyone touch her. Okay, Clara said quietly. Vincent pulled back just enough to look at her lips. The tension that had been winding tight between them for weeks finally snapped. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was possessive, desperate, and heavy with the weight of unsaid things. Clara responded instantly, dropping her glass onto the sofa cushion and grabbing the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer. She anchored herself to him, meeting his intensity with her own quiet fire. When they finally broke apart, the air in the room was thick. Vincent rested his forehead against hers again, his breathing slightly ragged. Tomorrow, Vincent murmured, his thumb tracing her jawline. We have to restructure the south suburbs accounts. Clara smiled, her fingers tracing the expensive fabric of his suit. The cynic in her was quieted. The ghost had found a home. I'll have the preliminary models ready by 9, she promised. Make it 10, Vincent said, pulling her into his chest. I'm the boss. I can push a meeting. The storm outside raged on, washing the grime from the Chicago streets. Inside the fortress of glass and steel, the ledger was balanced. The debt was paid, and the ghost in the machine was finally, truly, alive. Did Vincent and Clara's story keep you on the edge of your seat? This dark, grounded tale proves that real power isn't about the money or the violence. It's about absolute, unyielding loyalty. If you loved watching Clara turn from a desperate secretary into a formidable queen of the syndicate, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who crave gritty, intense, mafia romances with a cynical twist. What do you think Clara will do next? Drop a comment below and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, high-stakes storytelling every week.